By identifying a funding opportunity announcement, also known as a FOA, or a research funding proposal, RFP, or a solicitation, as it's commonly called, that fits your research goals, that's a great start. Honestly, that is the ideal place to start. There are several services such as Grant Forward, which RIT pays for and is free to all of RIT faculty and staff. There's services such as grants.gov, which has just about every federal solicitation listed on their website. And you can also check previous year's solicitations, as many of them renew every year. That is another way to plan ahead and get ideas for future funding. And if you're looking for something more specific, you can always use Google and search certain key terms with the words grant or funding, and just Google around. Sometimes it might not be a federal fund or a sponsor, it might just be a corporate or a foundation that will provide those great opportunities. And I know 2 weeks ago, I think we had the foundation ladies presenting as well. But using foundation relations is a great way to identify other sources. If you find a solicitation and you have a pretty good idea for what you want, but you aren't sure if it fits exactly what they're requesting, don't be shy to send an email to the program officer. Just a brief email outlining your objectives and ask them if this is a good fit. Many times they may even direct you to a different solicitation if they feel it's a better fit than what their program offers. Once you have a funding opportunity in mind, even if it's just a thought, please alert myself or Lori. We both work as a team together, so she assists me a lot of times in keeping me on track too. With covering various colleges, it can get very busy, and so she keeps me on track with NTID proposals. But by sending me a link or filling out SRS's notification of intent to propose, which you can see the link on the screen, this will just ask some basic proposal information and will send a notification to me. And then I can follow up via email and ask a few more questions or read the solicitation. If anything, it helps it put it on my radar. Like Lori mentioned, I cover several colleges on campus, not just NTID. So I may have 10 other proposals due that day or even that week of your deadline. So the more notice I have to plan accordingly, the better we can plan for a successful submission. Once you have a research idea and have identified a proposal opportunity, we can start to develop a budget. Part of my job is checking for compliance with RIT policies, as this is required of all sponsored projects. If your project involves any of the identified areas, additional approvals or reviews are required, and this may take extra added time. So if you know in your budget you might have certain categories that will be included in the project, they're definitely worth identifying ahead of time, or even if they come up during the development of the budget, just let me know. The most common ones are a subaward to another university, or a contractor or a vendor. If you plan to have human subject research or possibly a potential conflict of interest with a company. Say your cousin is the CEO of that company and you want to use them. That could be a conflict of interest. So it's good to alert me ahead of time so we can try to get some of those things out of the way, as they might require extra paperwork or informing superiors in the process. Some other common research compliance areas are information security requirements, intellectual property, IP. That is becoming more common, but you'll want to notify me ahead of time if it's going to involve something like that. And environmental health and safety, export control, or if you require additional space on campus, say for a lab or extra offices. That's something that gets identified on the PRF, the proposal routing form. But it's good to know ahead of time so we can plan accordingly. When reading through the solicitation or the RFP, you'll find these acronyms all over the place, and there's different names. So I'll usually refer to it as a solicitation or RFP or FOA, but you may come across hundreds of acronyms for it. But when reading through the solicitation, we want to identify key aspects. What is the maximum amount of years of support for the project? Is there a dollar limit per year or a limit for the entire project? Certain sponsors, particularly NIH, has a salary cap. Right now, that at the moment it's $199,000. Typically in January each year, NIH announces a new limit, which usually has about a 3% increase. So if you happen to make $250,000 a year, I will cap your salary in the budget at $199,000 over your appointment period. Not that you can request that amount in the budget, but it sets up your monthly amount. So that's why they cap it. Some sponsors have effort limitations to where you can only have so much effort in a fiscal year. NSF is an example of this one. They only allow 2 months per year, and they work off of a calendar year. So you may have 3 proposals or 3 funded awards from NSF, and you shouldn't have more than 2 months in that calendar year on NSF support. If you do, this does require disclosure, extra disclosure or approvals from NSF as well. Certain RFPs require maybe an annual trip to a specific location, generally Washington, D.C., to meet with a program officer, or programmatic meetings, anything like this. So we really just want to review the solicitation and see what requirements are in there. There may be project narrative requirements as well. Most of the time I will focus on budget ones, and I'll try to help out with the project narrative ones, but they may request discussion of certain points, or development plans for your scope of work, quarterly reporting requirements. So it's important to read through the entire solicitation to make sure you can address those points or even meet those required objectives. One thing that it doesn't come up very often, but it's usually a first one to look for, is PI eligibility. If you have several grants, you might not be eligible for certain programs, as they might try to foster younger PIs to apply and have a chance. But most NSF, NIH usually list PI eligibility. So it's important to just make sure you can actually apply for that program. So, and as always, like I said before, as soon as you know or you're considering it, just let me or Lori know. Even if you send me a notice of intent to propose and then like a week later you say, no, this wasn't a right fit, I'm not going to do it. It's easier for me to take it off my list than to try to add it to my list. As deadlines get closer, it just gets busier. So once we've cleared those starting points on the RFP and we know our limitations, we can begin the budget. These are the key categories that are standard in most sponsored budgets. Understanding them will help prepare for a grant project. The budget should be the financial representation of proposed work. Asking too much or too little can impact the reviewer's perception of your project proposal. As a PI, you are the most knowledgeable person to determine the necessary resources. I will offer guidance and assistance with what is reasonable, allocable, and allowable. So as a PI, you'll need to provide me with information on who will be participating, what roles they will play, and how much effort they will contribute on the project. Ideally in calendar months. You also need to outline costs for travel, equipment, materials and supplies, subawards, vendors, consultants, and any other project-specific costs. I will help you build the sponsored compliant budget based on your cost estimates utilizing RAT rates. Some experienced PIs prefer to send me a list of personnel and effort in an email, and then I'll add those salaries and effort to the budget template and leave the rest blank. And I'll send it to them for them to fill out. Then once they're done, they'll send it back to me. I'll review it and check it for compliance. So I try to be as flexible as I can. So if you want to work that way, or if you want to just take the whole budget, I'm willing to work however you want to do it. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, we're a team. So as long as we get it done, that's the most important part. So now let's look at some of these major budget categories in further detail. Two of the most fundamental questions when preparing your budget are who will receive funding and how much time will they commit to the project. How you answer those questions determines your personnel costs. please don't just say so-and-so needs 10,000 on the project, or they need 1.5 months effort to fill in the rest of their summer. Just put that in and we'll make it work. Just really think through the process. Trying to fill a void isn't a good idea to do on a budget. Personnel costs generally make up the majority of the budget, so it's important to think through it. Personnel effort will be represented to the sponsors in person months by calendar year, academic year, or summer months. And that's based on your appointment with RIT. RIT doesn't propose faculty effort on an hourly basis, so please send it to me calendar months, or you could do a percentage of time as well. So how much effort will you, the PI, need to devote on this project, and when? This should include both technical and project management activities, such as oversight, reporting requirements. Those are all things to consider as a PI. Who is considered senior personnel? Senior personnel are defined as individuals who contribute to the scientific development or execution of a project in a substantive or measurable way. This category also includes co-PIs, or NIH calls them co-Is, and they are RIT employed or employees. Personnel costs are based on actual current salaries and projected effort. Most of the times we plan for a 3% increase per fiscal year. And RIT's fiscal year starts in July. I think NTID, if I remember right, is in October. But so I'll try to plan those accordingly. And then project senior personnel is more of a minor role. Sometimes it may be advisory. They don't really have spending authority.
David?
Yeah.
David, this is Lori.
Yes.
We had a question pop up that I think is appropriate to take now while we're on this topic. Can you talk a little bit about how to obtain the salary information when you have other people on your team?
Absolutely.
You mentioned salary, it's based on salary, but how do they get that?
All right, so Sponsored Research Services actually was recently given access to researchers' salaries. So faculty who do research, or some personnel, we have access to their salaries. So if you give me their names in an email, I can provide that on the budget spreadsheet. The other way is sending an email to that person and CCing Maria Ocasio in NTID, and she will provide me with the salary for that person. SRS recently got access to salaries. It used to take a long time. Sometimes it could take several days in getting that salary information or waiting for approvals. So I guess the RIT higher ups finally decided to give us the authority to view salary for certain people, mainly researchers. Effort is broken out into 3 ways, depending on your contract with the RIT. You might have a 12-month appointment, which would be calendar year, or a 9-month, which would be academic. And if you have a 12-month contract or appointment, there is no summer effort calculated for you. If you have an academic appointment, then the budget generally is calculated in academic or summer months. And the benefit rates that go along with that are different. One thing I wanted to point out is if you plan to take a full summer effort, that does max out at 2.7 months. But that means no vacation or participation in any other RIT supported activities. So it's definitely worth discussing with your department head or dean prior to requesting for full summer support. And then effort limitation does not apply to research staff or faculty that are 100% funded via external support. I'll mention this as well. I don't normally handle it, but if you plan to have a course release, I know as a general rule, but I think this is college specific. It's 10% effort per course. And you'll definitely need the appropriate approvals from your department or the college or the dean. If you plan to do this, SRS doesn't get involved. So please have those conversations internally with your department head or supervisor. And then you can report back to me your effort in calendar months. Other personnel is where you'll continue to build the rest of your team. This section includes the salary and wages associated with the effort of individuals who are not considered senior personnel. So PI, co-PI, they're not senior personnel. A lot of times these are postdoctoral researchers, students, may have technical staff. Oh, sorry, Nikki. Other personnel costs are based on actual salaries and projected effort, just like the PI and co-PIs as well. Technical staff and support staff could be other non-administrative RIT staff, such as if you plan to hire a coordinator for a program or something along those lines. Will students be involved? If you think so, are the proposed activities consistent with graduate or undergraduate level of work? Do you already have access to qualified students, or will you need to recruit new students? And determining if this is an hourly job or if this is a research experience that directly relates to their degree of study, which is often known as a graduate research assistant or GRA. I'll keep going. At RIT, postdoctoral researchers are considered staff, not faculty. Postdocs can charge a maximum of 98% effort on sponsored projects. And this allows them 2% to attend other RIT activities, such as departmental meetings or workshops or RIT events. Students are a vital part of the research enterprise, and most proposals include a graduate or undergraduate students, and many include both. For the PI, it's important to understand the different ways students can be included in the sponsored projects. The student's role on the research project will determine how they are categorized and compensated. Graduate and undergraduate students can be included on sponsored projects as employees. In this capacity, their work would be directed by the senior personnel or PI, and they would be paid hourly wages consistent with the departmental practices at RIT. Typically, they would max out at 20 hours per week during the academic year, or 40 hours during the summer months. And we normally use $15 per hour minimum. Although it's not typically done, but we can plan for incremental raises on students as well, similar to the 3% increase for faculty and staff. If you plan to have an undergraduate student for all 4 years of the project, it's hard to keep them at the same $15 rate all 4 years. Generally, we don't, just because it doesn't fit into the budget, but it can be done if that's an option you want to have. Then additionally, hiring undergraduate students to work on sponsored projects could also help them in fulfilling their co-op requirements. Many sponsored projects include graduate research assistants or GRAs, like I said. In this role, they generally function as a student first, which enhances their academic experience, and they receive a stipend representing their level of effort. A graduate student is considered full-time at 20 hours per week. If a student receives a stipend, they may be eligible for tuition remission. And tuition remission is calculated based on their level of effort. RIT does provide a pay scale rates for GRAs and GTAs, graduate teaching assistants, at the master's and PhD levels. The link was way too long to include on this slideshow, but it's in my notes, and I'll make sure Nancy sends out this PowerPoint after my presentation, so you can access it in there. I generally fill those in for you on the budget, but I know some of you like to pretty much do the budget yourselves and then have it reviewed. So I just want to provide all that information for you. Also, please remember, GRAs are paid a stipend for living expenses, and it's not compensation for their work. They also must be a matriculated student in the MS or PhD programs. And generally, you can include administrative staff that gets paid out of the F&A that RIT receives. The exception to that would be if you're hiring a coordinator or something like that, would be programmatic staff. So the budget should always include the budget or the benefit charges associated with each person's effort. And this is based on predetermined rates for academic year, calendar year, or even summer effort. The exception would be for some sponsors, mainly non-federal foundations or corporations. They might limit or even restrict fringe benefits. So it's important to be familiar with the solicitation and what you can include in your budget. These rates are built into the budget and will auto-calculate as it's populated. So when I show you the budget later on in the presentation, I'll show you the rates tabs and where everything is. But I'll always double check this and make sure it's up to date on the rates. Fringe rates do not apply to undergraduate or graduate students, but they do apply to postdocs. And then, like I mentioned before, there are different fringe rates for sponsored research versus private or corporate foundations. Some sponsors or programs allow the PI to request equipment that is necessary to support the proposed research. Equipment includes standalone or fabricated items and is exempt from indirect costs or F&A. RIT defines standalone equipment as an item having an acquisition cost greater than $5,000 and a useful life greater than 1 year. Fabricated equipment is built or assembled from individual parts, or when completed has a whole cost of $5,000 or more. So many programs will not fund significant equipment purchases. So it's really important to read the RFP just to make sure that what you want to purchase is allowable. At the budget developmental stage, identifying equipment is the only requirement. You can collect an estimated price quote from a company or things like that, but there's nothing more in terms of paperwork for me. But when you go to purchase the actual equipment, once it's awarded, you will have to follow RIT procurement policy, which requires at least 3 quotes or bids from different vendors. The exception to that would be if you can justify a sole source vendor, meaning nobody else can provide the exact specifications that you need. Generally, a justification for this is required in the proposal. It might be in the budget justification, or it could be in the facilities, equipment, and other resources page if it was a NSF proposal. Some may even want it in the program narrative if it's a main component of your budget. Capital equipment is excluded from the F&A base. And F&A is calculated on the modified total direct costs, which I will go over a little bit later on as well. So if you're buying several laptops or tablets or something that's going to add up to $8,000, that's not capital equipment. But buying a supercomputer whose CPU, their memory, or an upgraded processor, something along those lines, amounts to more than $8,000, well, in this case, $5,000, but amounts to a total of $8,000, that would be considered permanent equipment. All right, so travel. I think this is probably one of the parts most PIs are missing the most right now during this pandemic, I would assume. So travel is allowable as a direct cost when it provides a direct benefit to a sponsored project, and it's allowable by the sponsor. Faculty, staff, students, they can all travel in support of the sponsored project. And RIT reimburses travelers for necessary and reasonable business expenses incurred while traveling. In order to justify trips, they must be reasonable. Wanting to meet with a collaborator just to do so or because they live in a fun city, that's definitely not a reason to do it. And especially nowadays with Zoom and other conferencing services, as some program officers might request you to reduce those travels prior to an award. So you could include them in your budget, but they may ask you to take them out. Meetings, conferences, those do accomplish proposal objectives of disseminating your results. So usually those are allowable expenses. I do want to point out when planning for a conference or travel in a future year, although you might not know the exact location, you do need to identify a tentative location just for budgeting purposes. An example would be a conference that's held on the East Coast and then the next year on the West Coast. You could plan for New York City and LA, since those have higher per diem rates, just to make sure you cover your expenses. You might also have a conference that one year is hosted in the US and another year is hosted internationally. So just take a look at the previous years of those conferences and where they were hosted. And you can sort of plan for cities that they were at. This is something I'm please asking you to do. Don't just estimate $1,000 for travel each year without doing some basic research. Plan it out, do a little bit of research, go into a US air carrier website like American Airlines or United. Get an idea of the flight costs. Many conferences, you'll want to look them up. They might even have a registration fee. And those sometimes can be very high. It could be even $500. So if you only plan $1,000 for your trip and your registration is $500, your flight will be another $500, your per diem and hotel could be $500 to $750. So you really need to make sure you plan it out. In the budget justification that we'll go through in a little bit, that does have a breakdown of all the different categories that we typically include in the travel section, which, as I mentioned, are airfare, hotel per diem, your subsistence or daily per diems, Ground transportation, registration costs, and then RIT will reimburse you in two ways. You can use your actual expenditures, which you need to provide all the receipts for, or you can just request a daily per diem. And RIT does have a reimbursement rate chart per city on the website. And again, like before, the link is way too long to fit on the page, so I have it in the notes, and you can access it that way. Alcohol is not allowed on federal grants either. So please don't go paying for everyone's tab after a conference thinking Uncle Sam will cover the bill. I'm sure many foundations would not allow or appreciate this either. If you haven't read about it, there are several horror stories of PIs attempting this several times at other universities. They usually ended up in jail, or the university had considerable fines. At the request of the PIs here at RIT, sometimes I have included a travel tab in the standard RIT budget, which includes a lot of these categories and can help you plan out your costs. So if a sponsor is willing to pay for your travel, you shouldn't have to pay for half of your travel because of poor planning. I generally take a quick look at travel, but I don't question your request unless it seems way too low or your numbers in the justification don't add up. If I have some time in the future, I may try to get permission to add in the travel tab to our budgets, just so they're there as a permanent option for you to use if you want to. Participant support costs are fees paid to or on behalf of participant or trainees. They cannot be RIT employees. These expenses are divided into the following project categories, which would be stipends, subsistence, or per diem, travel, and other. These costs can include items such as stipends for participants, food allowance provided to a participant, or coverage of a meal cost if they're attending a workshop, travel allowance or reimbursement of registration fees. If you expand the participant section on the budget template, you will see all these items listed out. Now, identifying the estimated number of participants is required. Generally on the budget, we calculate it per participant. And once you get awarded, you're not necessarily held to that exact number of participants, but pretty close to it. So you want to have a generally you want to have a good idea of how many will participate in this. And indirect costs are not applied to participant support costs. Many people tend to confuse participant support and human subject fees. And those fees are budgeted in other direct costs section of the budget. Human subjects are people or subjects who you pay a fee for their participation in a research project. for example, $20 to take multiple surveys over a period of time. While participant support is paying for travel or a stipend to a participant or a trainee to come to RIT, to participate in a workshop or a training activity, symposium. If at the time of developing your budget you aren't sure, please send me an email or describe what you plan to do, and I can help walk you through which categories would be the appropriate fit. So like I said before, F&A is not applied to participant support. So we don't want to go through the whole project or budget development and then realize that these participant supports are actually human subject and then have to change everything around. So it's important to distinguish them ahead of time. The other direct costs category, this includes direct costs that directly benefit the project, but don't really fit into any other category. So these can include several ones I have listed up on the slide. Some of the most common ones, materials and supplies. These would be tangible items that are under 5,000. Such as laptops, tablets, equipment such as test tubes, beakers, can be all sorts of items. Publications, documentation, and dissemination of charges. And I've noticed this is another area where PIs don't necessarily plan. It's kind of whatever's left in the budget, they'll use for that. But you should definitely do some research and see what the cost is per page. There are open access fees that can generally be $800 to $1,000. If you want to publish in color and print it in a journal, that could be a much higher rate than just black and white. So you should do a little bit of research just to make sure what you want to have published is in your budget and affordable. Computer services, RIT, ITS fees can go in here, but computer hosting or repository services, any costs associated with computer-based retrieval or scientific, technical, educational information, those should all be included. RIT charges ITS fees, and there are federal and non-federal rates. Although at the moment, it's really only a 40-cent difference per FTE or full-time employee. Human subject fees, as I mentioned before, paying a set fee for their participation in a research project. This typically gets included, or this always gets included in other direct costs. Tuition remission for GRAs and PhD students. Per RIT, a maximum of 50% remission is allowed. Generally, it doesn't always fit into the budget, but if you can allow it or if the solicitation calls for it, you'll want to include that. And that category is also excluded from F&A. One that comes up a lot at NTID would be interpreting services. So you'll really want to plan out what you'll need for interpreters and how much that will cost. Other sections would be consultant fees, purchase services. I'll go over some of those in the next coming slides. Many times you'll work on the budget justification as you work on the budget. So writing out your expenses in detail in the justification will help you not miss anything. And then as I review the budget, this will help me understand the costs as well. Subawards are probably some of the most common budget items included in the budget. And a subaward would be an outside organization involved in programmatic work that collaborates with RIT in determining the research direction. So the PI at the subaward, they might be the co-PI on the project if it's appropriate. And they might have their own team of senior personnel as well. Subawards are added to RIT other direct cost section, and the first 25,000 of each subaward is subject to F&A. So if you have $100,000 subaward and it's spread out over 4 years, the first 25,000 will be subject to F&A. Whether that happens in year 1, year 2, 3, it doesn't matter. And if you have multiple subawards, each subaward is subject to that 25,000. All the subawards aren't lumped together and then 25,000 is charged on that. It's per subaward. I just want to make that clear. Now I said earlier in the presentation, if you're going to involve a subaward, please let me know early. These take longer to process. So as I said, there's paperwork involved, there's budgets that need approval at the subawards, and a lot of subawards may have their own internal approval requirements. So it does take time, and we do have to plan for this ahead of time. I did have a proposal with a subaward, and the subaward sponsored research office had a policy where the full proposal or the scope of work needed to be submitted to their office 10 days in advance. RIT has a 5-day policy. But the RIT PI wasn't aware of this, and when we finally got the budget done with the subaward and they submitted to their office, that office would not move forward with it since it wasn't within their 10-day window. So with about a week and a half left, we had to scramble and drop the subaward, alter the proposal, which meant adjusting the budget, trying to find someone to fill in for that subaward co-PI. So planning ahead is definitely a good idea. I don't think I can say that enough. Collaborators have to provide specific internal and sponsored required documents, detailed budget, budget justification, statement of work. There's a RIT subrecipient questionnaire and form that they have to fill out. They might need to provide a copy of their institutional federal rates, or even the sponsor specific documents. such as a biosketch, current and pending. And then also, if you've been asked to be a subaward by someone, and assuming that the nature of your work is a great fit for that program, you should ask them first when they will need all the required info by, and what documents, because they might have their own subaward forms that need to be filled out. They'll obviously need a budget, a justification, all the same things we ask of them, they'll need from us. And if they have a 10-day policy where the full proposal has to be in, you might have to provide this information 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. Many times I'll work directly with their sponsored research office. So don't be shy to send the subaward PI an email asking them to link with myself. This will take some of the pressure off of you, and I can collect all the information from them that way. Vendors, sometimes also referred to as contractors, which please don't be confused by consultants. But that's why I think we typically try to refer to them as vendors to avoid confusion. But vendors provide goods or specific services in support of the research program or project. They aren't directly responsible for research, its direction, or the project results. Vendors provide these goods and services as part of their standard business operation, and market these to a variety of customers, which creates a procurement relationship, you could say. As a purchase service, if the deliverables are not satisfactory, the vendor is responsible for correcting the deliverable, or they risk non-payment for their goods by RIT. This protects the PI and RIT as well as the project. So if you ever are in an award and you feel like you're not getting satisfactory deliverables, please don't be shy to work with SPA or post-award to let them know. And the entire vendor amount is subject to F&A, so they are not excluded. Okay, so I'll cover them a little bit quicker if I can. Consultants, they provide expert services or guidance for a fee. And their work is done with without the reliance of their employer or its resources. So like I said, you might have a professor from another university, and so he would have to not use his university resources. Otherwise, they would generally be a subaward. And consultants are subject to F&A as well. I think a lot of the rest you can read within the slide and understand. So if you have any questions, let me know. But just so that I can make sure to cover everything else and have time for questions, I'll skip through some of the next stuff. RIT does provide helpful links though. There is a subrecipient determination checklist. So if you're unsure of where they would fit in, you can use that link to fill out the questions and it'll help you decide. I think many of you are most likely at this time familiar with indirect costs, also known as F&A, since I've mentioned it a bunch of times throughout this presentation. But these F&A costs are calculated off the total modified direct cost, which you'll see a line item at the bottom of the budget template. And I just wanted to point out that there are 3 different types of negotiated rates that RIT has. The most common is organized research at 46.5%. There's instruction and then other sponsored activity. And then if you want a breakdown of what might be included in each one of those, the SRS website has a pretty detailed section for that. But I believe to most of you, the organized research rate is what will be applied. And then one other thing, there is on-campus and off-campus rates. The off-campus rate is if 50% or more of your project happens overseas or in another part of the world outside of the US. And this would be, or actually outside of RIT. Some sponsors or funding programs might require for you to contribute resources or effort, and this would be known as cost share or cost matching sometimes. RIT allows cost share only when required by the funding agency or if it's specified in the RFP. If cost sharing comes up or it's required in the program, I'll see it, but please let me know and I'll make sure we identify it in the budget. This has to be identified on the budget spreadsheet, the justification, and on the PRF. And then some sponsors do limit indirect costs as well. Most foundations do. But just so you all know, RIT does not voluntarily reduce the F&A rate below the negotiated rate. So if a solicitation says we'd like you to use 20%, but it's not required, RIT might not do that. They might end up using the normal research rate. So that is an item that we should bring up right at the beginning when we're reviewing the solicitation. I skipped ahead. I'll skip the budget template that I was going to show you just because of time. But another part of the proposal is the budget justification. And that is an essential part of the budget. I have my notes in here, which will have a whole bunch more details for you as well. But the main goal of the justification is to be able to explain your budget without having to look at the budget spreadsheet. So justify everything, every little bit of travel, every cost, as much detail as you can put in. When your budget is reviewed, you won't be there to explain it. So you want to make sure you rationalize all the expenses. You want to explain the roles of your co-PI, technical and support staff, student roles, travel, everything. and I'll skip the budget justification template. But for those of you who received it this morning, you can go through it. And it's a pretty thorough justification RIT provides. And then just a few common budget errors to be mindful of, especially as PIs like to work on the Excel sheet themselves. When you're adding lines, there's typically formula breaks or they don't get updated. So please be mindful of those and just let me know if you did do a change in the budget or added a line, just so I can go through and check it.
Great, thank you, David. This was very informative. Please, if you want to start entering questions in the chat, I am watching that as well. We did have a few come in throughout your presentation. I do realize this is a lot of information at once. You will have David's templates and the PowerPoint will be sent out to you as a resource, because honestly, it's too much to know or to remember. You won't think of it until you're ready to sit down and do a budget, and then you'll need to go back and have something to refer to. And you'll also notice the reoccurring theme that David talked about, which was start early. The main takeaway, start early, get in contact with David. He will help you through any budget issues that you might have or questions. So I try to organize the questions by categories that David was talking about. And under the personnel section, we had one question where someone wanted you to explain more about the co-op students, what the difference is.
There isn't a huge difference as far as I know between an undergraduate and a co-op. What they might have is requirements within their degree that they have to have so much experience at a workplace. And so sometimes being able to include them on a project that will fulfill that co-op requirement. But as far as pay goes, it's the same, whether it's an undergraduate or a co-op.
Thank you, David.
To add to that, there is a little bit more level of detail that can go into it. And I know there's almost salaried positions like stipends for co-ops and too, but for general purposes, they're the same dollar rate.
And I don't see any other questions coming in over the chat. Please, if you want to turn your video on and sign a question as well, that's okay. As we're waiting for more questions, I'm just going to go over some other comments that came in. There was some chat talk about paying students $15 an hour, and Sue, one of our NTID research administrators, mentioned a note in the chat about be careful on the post-award end because you have to have different job descriptions based on how much you are paying them. So we typically go by the New York State minimum wage. And if you put an hourly amount into your budget for a student, that doesn't mean you have to pay them that much. So if you put $15, but then you realize you can only pay them the current minimum wage, then that would be acceptable to change it and you don't need sponsor approval. Oh, and we have a question relating to the ITS fees, explaining how the FTE is calculated. And I believe that question came in as it relates to the ITS fees since it is based on FTE. David, do you want to address that one?
Sure. So the FTE is calculated on the full-time employee. So if it's I'll say the rate is $179.50 per month per FTE. So if you're calculating 2 months academic effort, it's going to be 179 times 2 months. If you're calculating 0.5 summer months, it'll be 0.5 times 179 for 2 weeks of work, basically. A postdoc, most people have them full time, so that'll be 12 months.
So, and I just want to mention to the faculty again, don't worry about how to calculate it because that is something that David will do. Once he knows what RIT people you want on your budget, he'll go ahead and get the salary information, and his formulas and his spreadsheet will take care of that for you. It will also add on the applicable fringe benefit rate and ITS fees based on the level of effort that you have in your budget. So as far as calculations like that go, I wouldn't worry too much about that or let that hold you up on when you're building your budget. David will work on that with you. So your main responsibility would be to let David know how much effort you want for which people. So he mentioned person months, which can be a little tricky how sponsors calculate that. So if you give him a percent and say 10% effort, he can calculate that into person months for you as well.
If my mind is working that day.
We have about 4 minutes left. Is there any other pressing questions that folks have? I do want to note as well, I see no questions yet, but David's slides all had a title, personnel section, other personnel section. Those are the sections that the federal sponsor actually uses. And when the budget gets input into the sponsor portal, those are the categories. So it's not categories that we're making up, it is federally based. So when it comes to an example like participant support, that is a federal term. And that's why David noted it's separate than human subjects, because it is a common area where confusion happens because we do call them sometimes, you know, a human subject, we might call them a human subject participant. So the terms do get a little tricky. It is dictated by the federal government. So I did want to mention that. So again, if you're working early with David and he sees you put something in participant support and he might ask questions, or you can let him know, like, I'm not sure where this goes in the budget. Another common error is when faculty build their budget, if they have a consultant, they might try to put them in the personnel section, which sounds reasonable because they are personnel. However, by the federal definition, they go in the other direct cost category, which David noted on his slides. So you will be able to refer back to his PowerPoint to see the differences. It does get very confusing.
Yeah, a good general rule of thumb is if they're not RIT employee, they should not be in your other personnel or senior personnel sections.